There's a little bit of light reflecting off that corner. Does that matter?
See,
Sort of.
I can see that from looking in the picture. No, that's all right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Here we are again. Okay. So here we are again.
Did you have a shave?
Oh, I haven't had a shave. I'm not going to worry about that. That's one for the outtake.
Well, I thought I'd just throw in a bit of levity for the start of the show.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
To start again.
Well, welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to be here. It
Yes.
really is, yeah. And this is a bit unusual, sitting here in our backyard talking to a video camera. But I've invited Greg along today, as you have already probably read on this post on my blog. We're going to be talking about his dad, who was his hero and who was a member of the famous Dambuster squadron in the Second World War, and also a prominent cricketer, and his dad. So we're just going to have a bit of a chat today about life with Dad and what that was all about, and we'll just ad-lib it from here and see how we go.
Okay.
So thinking about your dad then, just give me some of your impressions about him as a person.
Yeah, well, as a young kid growing up, of course, he was, well, that's exactly what he was, along with Mum, you know, two lovely people, they were my Mum and Dad.
Yep.
And I, really didn't know too much about what they'd achieved, or particularly what Dad had achieved, and because he never said too much about everything. But maybe if I just start with his first class cricket game as an 18-year-old.
Greg, stop right there, because I just want to make sure the microphone's working. So.
Okay.
Go back and have a look. Well, here we are again, Greg. Welcome to this special video, folks, to go with the post on my blog that I've been doing about Greg and his dad, who was his hero, who was a member of the famous Dambuster squadron in the Second World War and a prominent cricketer, and Greg's dad. So we're just going to talk for the next few minutes about life with Ross Stanford, growing up with him as your dad and your mum as well. So
Yep.
Over to you. I'll let you tell me first of all what your impressions are about your dad as a person.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. It's a pleasure to do this. I probably didn't get to know what my dad really achieved until later in life, because as a kid growing up, he was, well, just my dad, which doesn't sound quite right, does it? However, but I had a very good upbringing. Both parents were terrific to me, and perhaps if I start with Dad on his cricket career, he was first selected to play for South Australia as an 18-year-old. It was a first-class cricket game, but it wasn't actually a Sheffield Shield game because it was against Tasmania, and back in those days they used to blood a few young blokes and give Tasmanian cricketers a chance to play against the top people. Dad was 18, and when he walked down the steps of the grandstand out onto Adelaide Oval, the man waiting for him was Don Bradman.
So this is a match he was playing for South Australia against Tasmania.
That's correct, yes, yes. It wasn't actually for Sheffield Shield points, so. However, it was considered a first-class game, so that was, that was his introduction to first-class cricket after having performed very well at district level. And Dad was very nervous, he told me, and bottom line is he ran himself out for a duck. He was that nervous. Bradman ran him up and down the pitch for a couple of twos just to get him used to it, and then when Dad finally got to face a ball, he just pushed it into the covers and ran. So, An illustrious start. It was, and probably just as well he didn't run Bradman out. So, anyway, in that particular innings, Bradman actually scored South Australia's record first-class score on Adelaide Oval of 365 not out. So
On individual,
and I think it still is a record actually for a South Australian on Adelaide Oval.
Yeah.
So I guess the plus about it all is that Dad's name is on the scoreboard of the old Adelaide Oval scoreboard there, and there's a photo of it in the museum.
Yep.
It says Bradman 365 not out, and underneath it says Stanford naught. So at least his name's next to Bradman, so that's the plus of it all.
Yeah.
Anyway, so moving on from there.
Moving on from there, this will be the man that wants to fix the fridge. Excuse me, Greg.
You told me that was going to happen.
Hello, this is Jeff. Yeah, that's right.
You dropped your cone too, by the way. That's right.
All right. So we were just talking, Greg, about your dad's start to his cricket career, and you were about to say moving on from that. So what happened then?
That's correct, yes. Well, he did play another year or so in Adelaide, and his form wasn't really good, so he didn't get another go. And then he was working with the State Bank, and they, as they did in those days, I think banks still do it, they transfer people around quite a lot. He ended up spending 3 years in the Riverland, 18 months at Waker and 18 months at Ceylon Bend.
Can I just take you back a second then? So before he played for South Australia, he played locally with a club in South Australia?
Yeah, with West Torrens.
West Torrens Cricket Club?
West Torrens Cricket Club,
Okay.
yeah. We were born in the...
Yep.
West Torrens born and bred, yes, that's true.
Yep.
So he spent 3 years in the Riverland, which he actually took Wakery South, were bottom, and in the year he got there, he took them to the top. He scored 4 or 5 centuries there, so he continued his career in the country, and then of course the war intervened, so all in all he spent 8 years away from Adelaide. So yes, he didn't get the chance to play first-class cricket again, and naturally until 1947-48, I think, or around there, and he played another dozen games, and then he became a family man when I turned up, so he was not available for state cricket anymore. He just, that's what he chose to do. Yeah.
So just a little bit then about life with the, was it the 617 Squadron? Is that what
617 Dambuster Squadron, yeah. He
tell us
was
a
a member of that.
About that and your impressions about that from what he used to tell you. And
Yeah. As I touched on earlier, he didn't say much about, you know, the war years, as a lot of them do, and you can understand war's not a nice thing. They didn't talk about it much, so I wasn't really aware of his achievements until much later, and of course as you get older you appreciate it all more anyway. Yes, he was a member of that squadron, which is probably, well, I've been told it's the most famous squadron of World War II in the Air Force, and he didn't actually go on the big dams raid that caused all the grief for Hitler and his crew. He was actually a reserve for that. 19 planes took off and only 11 came back, so Dad and his crew were one of the replacement crews for those who were lost. So he actually flew 24 sorties, as was a common term they used, trips
over enemy territory.
Over enemy territory with the 617 Squadron, after already having proven himself on 463 and 467 squadrons. He and his crew, they did 23 trips. So they'd established themselves as pretty good at what they did. So all in all, he and his crew took off 47 times and they came back 47 times.
And what was what was the aircraft that he was actually flying?
Oh, it's a Lancaster bomber, which is, I believe, the biggest plane in the war.
Okay.
So he was actually the flight lieutenant, chief pilot.
Chief pilot.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So he did his bit, like thousands of others did for his country. Yeah.
And then at the end of the war, he was involved in the what they call the victory test matches. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's right. You can probably understand that most of them, after being away for so long fighting a war, actually really wanted to get home. But however, England being, well, cricket was founded in England, of course, and it's a great, it was considered an honour to you know, play a few matches, and what they decided to do was play 5 test matches against the England test team.
Yeah.
And nobody gave them a chance because they, you know, they were, you know, most of them battle fatigued. I suppose some of the Englishmen were too, of course, but they actually did very well because they had Lindsay Hassett was captain, who was the only one who'd actually played Test cricket
And he went on to be
till that
captain
stage.
of Australia too, didn't
Yeah,
he?
he did. He did, and the other famous, one of the most famous ever cricketers who played there was, of course, Keith Miller. However, he didn't play a Test match until after the war.
Yeah, he was just starting out in his cricket
He
career,
was,
wasn't he?
yeah. So they won 2 of these Test matches, lost 2 and drew 1, and gave everybody a lot of pleasure, which is the idea of it after being totally war torn and.
Yes, I read it.
Yeah.
Did a lot to lift morale, particularly in England at that time.
It did, exactly. And they also, on the way back home, played a few matches in India and Ceylon, as it was then. Now it's Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
And they also did a trip around Australia, playing each state.
And the English people thought they were actually the Australian Test team when they were over there, from what I remember reading.
I believe a lot of people thought that way. However, it was not; those 5 matches were not recognised as Test matches, so none of them ever got a baggy green, which is a disappointment. It was recently, or just 7 or 8 years ago, I had a man ring me this is when John Howard was still Prime Minister, and a cricket nut. Enthusiast, that's right. So they were going to try and get through to him and see if they could, all these years later, get a baggy green for everybody, but it didn't happen. So
well, maybe that's something that still is there to be achieved, Greg.
Well, I suppose, yeah. Maybe I should give it another go. I don't know.
There must be someone that's, and this is not a pun intended, willing to go into bat for them.
Oh, there's probably quite a few people. Yeah.
But, and your dad, I understand, was also involved in some charity work after the war as well. Tell me about that.
Yes, that's true. His immediate boss, his name was Leonard Cheshire, who became he was very famous actually, particularly in England. He is one of those lucky ones that took off more than 100 times and came back too.
So your dad was serving under him.
That's right.
In the squadron.
That's right. Yes. So after the war, he started up this charity organisation. It was named the Ryder Cheshire Foundation. The Ryder being Cheshire's wife, who was Sue Ryder. So they started these homes in India first up for the underprivileged. In 1959, and then they expanded to a few other countries as well, and then when they decided to open out in Australia in 1970, Len and Dad remained good mates, and so he asked Dad if he would start the foundation in Australia. So Dad was only too willing to do that, naturally enough, and
I understand your dad was involved in that for some years, and your mum too, up until not long before he died.
That's
which is a little while ago now.
Oh, that's true. They were, and they got homes established in half a dozen places around Australia to help underprivileged people
and orphans as well. Is that how it worked, or was it just people who were struggling? And
it's mostly struggling. I think. I'm not sure of that.
We'll have to look that. We'll have to Google that afterwards.
We'll Google that one afterwards. Yeah, I don't think it was all. No, it's just underprivileged people in general. That's how I take it. Yeah. So and then of course, for all his sporting achievements and his war effort and his charity work over extended over 35, 40 years for the whole lot of it. in 1991 he was awarded an Order of Australia Medal in recognition of all that, which was terrific.
Yeah.
And he said at the time, he says, "Oh, gee, your mum deserves one of these." Well, he says, "I couldn't have achieved it without your mother." That's how he put it. And then my mother passed away in 2000 quite suddenly, and she also was awarded an OAM, which Dad was so happy about.
Wow.
She was nominated before she passed away and awarded it posthumously. So it was a great day for myself and Dad to go to Government House and accept hers on her behalf.
Yeah.
So, so I consider myself, well, just a lucky son, if I can put it that way, to have had such fantastic parents who gave a lot and got rewarded deservedly for it. And
I understand they were very humble with it. They didn't sort of boast about themselves.
No, they
went quietly about it.
Well, that's true. If anyone ever asked Mum or Dad questions about any of these achievements, they would quite happily talk about it, but they wouldn't. They wouldn't be the ones to bring it up.
They weren't blowing their own bag.
No, that's right. And I'm just trying to work out how I'm going to get one, but I can't find a way at the minute.
Yeah, an OAM.
An OAM, yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
Well, this video could win an Academy Award, you know.
You think it'll go some way towards achieving that?
Oh, I don't know, Greg.
No, I don't think so.
It's highly doubtful.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. Very doubtful, yeah.
So your dad was your hero, and your mum.
Yeah.
And I can say the same thing too.
Yeah.
So, you know, people out there who perhaps, really haven't had the same privileges that we've had, what would you say to them about how they should view their parents? What do you think about that? I mean, they might have had a tough time, but what do you think about that? That's putting you on the spot, I know.
You are. Yeah, but I guess it's like most kids, you grow up, and particularly when you become a teenager, well, you seem to think your parents are stopping you from doing everything, or they're always wrong, and it's not till you get older that you appreciate they were right most of the time. Yeah. And I just sort of, I guess I was very lucky to have my parents as who they were and how they brought me up. It was always, best intentions, and I just say to anybody, well, your parents are the two most important people in your life, as far as I'm concerned, and particularly your mother, because she's the main rearer of you, if that's the way to put it, and just respect them for who they are, and
really
honour them, and try and
look after them in their old age, as I know you did. You
were
a major caregiver for your dad.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Okay, so Greg, when your dad died, you arranged a fairly big funeral at the Adelaide Oval. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I can. Yes, it's been 6 years ago in July. July 06, he passed away, and because he'd played a bit of cricket at Adelaide Oval and was, I figured it was appropriate to send him off in that fashion, and we did it held the ceremony in the big white tent at the back of the Western Grandstand as it was then. Of course, that's changed now.
Not much there at the moment.
No, it's all been renovated at the minute. So yes, we had a big send-off there, and there's quite a few people turned up, which was good to see, and we had a drink in the Ridings room, because Phil Ridings had a room named after him there. With one of his great mates from teenage years.
And he was a Test player and South Australian player as well, Phil Ridings, wasn't he?
Oh, no, he didn't play Test cricket.
Play test
no, he didn't play Test cricket, but he captained South Australia in 90-odd games, and then became an Australian selector.
Okay, that's right.
And on the Australian Cricket Board, So, we had a few drinks and sandwiches afterwards to send him off.
I remember that day. I had probably a few too many little pies and pasties, I think. So, as I always seem to do.
There was a couple of other people that had a few too many beers, that I remember. Beverages, not so much pies and pasties, And then, about a dozen of us ended up at the Lockleys Hotel after that even, stretched it into the evening, so we gave him a pretty good send-off.
It was a celebration of a wonderful life, wasn't it? And I must take the opportunity to thank you, Greg, for inviting me, however long it was ago now, maybe 10 or 11 years ago, when we went round to your dad's place and your place to take those photos of he dressed up in his uniform, and people can see some of the photos from the day we did that photo.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful day, wasn't it? We had good fun that day.
It really was, and I'm very grateful to you too as well for doing that, because you know, I left it almost too late, so to speak. But yeah, I'm just so glad we were able to do that together.
Yeah, that was good.
And now we're putting it together.
For the wider public to see.
Yeah, that's right.
Maybe,
so yeah.
Okay.
No.
All right.
Thank you very much for today as well, mate.
Thanks for coming, Greg. Well
My
done.
pleasure.
Yeah, and I think we finally got there in the end. Apart from interruptions and interruptions with fridge mechanics and phone calls, and in spite of the fact that I still haven't had a shave.
Oh.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Thank you too, Jeff.